If someone had told me years ago that I'd end up here, pouring out my story like it's some cheap tabloid drama, I would have laughed them off. Drama was never my thing. I wasn't the type to get caught up in messy situations. I really thought I had everything under control, but life has this way of flipping everything upside down just when you think you're safe. Let me back up a bit. I'm not usually one to feel sorry for myself, but what I'm about to share, this is my reality. No softening the edges, no skipping over the parts that hurt. You deserve the full picture. And who knows, maybe it'll help someone out there. If not, at least it's helping me get my head on straight. So, here we go. I grew up in your typical small-town family. Dad worked long hours, and Mom was always there holding things together. We weren't living in luxury, but we weren't struggling either. My parents were the stick-together no matter what type. They fought plenty, but divorce? That wasn't even in their vocabulary. So naturally, I grew up thinking marriage was forever. You signed the papers, and that was it. You stayed loyal, worked through the rough patches, and didn't run when things got hard. I guess that's where my messed up sense of commitment came from. The downside to growing up with parents like mine is that you start expecting too much from yourself and everyone else. I believed that if I just worked hard enough, I could fix any problem in a relationship. Even with my first marriage, I thought I could patch it up too. Spoiler alert, I couldn't. My first wife and I were young, probably way too young. We rushed into everything, marriage, buying a house, even talking about kids, like a couple of clueless idiots. But when reality hit, financial problems, her realizing we didn't really fit anymore, it all fell apart. That's when I first tasted betrayal. She left me for someone else, someone more thrilling, I guess. And there I was, left picking up the pieces. But that experience only hardened my resolve. I swore the next time would be different. I wouldn't let myself fail again. And then she came along. Let's call her Amanda. We met at a party, of all places. I wasn't looking for anything serious. I was still licking my wounds from the divorce. But Amanda? She was like this tornado of energy, and I got swept up. She had a way of making you feel like the only person in the room, like nothing else mattered. The kind of woman who makes you forget every bad thing that ever happened. We took things slow at first. Our first date wasn't anything extravagant, just dinner at this cozy Italian spot I used to go to. But it wasn't the food, it was the way she talked. Sharp, quick-witted, and she knew how to hold her ground. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the one I can finally build a life with. We both had our baggage, sure, but it felt like we could conquer anything together. It wasn't always smooth sailing, though. Like any couple, we had our rough spots. There was that time I lost my job, and we had to scrape by on our income. But we managed. We were a team, or so I thought. The thing about hindsight is that it's a cruel teacher. You look back and realize just how blind you were to all the red flags waving in your face. Before I dive deeper into that mess, there's someone else I need to mention, my best friend Ethan. Ethan and I went way back. We'd known each other since high school, when we thought we were invincible, ready to take on the world. He wasn't just a friend. He was more like a brother. We did everything together, played sports, went on road trips, and had more than a few wild nights I'd rather not recall. When my first marriage imploded, Ethan was there pulling me through it. I trusted him with my life. Naturally, he was the first person I introduced Amanda to. The three of us even went on trips together, just for fun, no drama. At the time, I never thought twice about it. Now, looking back, I wonder if I missed something. I thought I had life all figured out. Amanda and I fell into this rhythm, planning for the future, talking about kids, vacations, and even buying a bigger house. We weren't rich, but we were doing fine. After all the crap I'd been through, I thought I finally had it all, a steady home, a woman I loved, and a best friend who was like family. But the thing about family life is that it has a way of blinding you. You get so caught up in the day-to-day grind that you don't notice the cracks forming underneath. We spent our Sundays binge-watching TV, planning our next vacation, talking about how many kids we wanted. And like a fool, I thought that meant everything was good. Stability's just an illusion when the ground's already shifting under your feet. I know, You're probably wondering when everything started to go sideways. But the truth is, in the beginning, it never feels like something's wrong. You don't see the betrayal coming because, honestly, you refuse to. I sure didn't. And with Ethan? Well, I thought we were so close that if anything was off, he'd let me know. He always had my back, just like I had his. Never in a million years did I think my best friend and my wife would. But I'm jumping ahead here. There were little things, details that now scream red flags. But at the time, I was too busy playing the role of the happy husband to notice. For now, just know this. Things weren't as perfect as I made them out to be. You ever hear people say you can feel when something's wrong? Like you just know, even if everything on the surface looks fine, there's this nagging feeling eating at you? That's exactly what happened to me. And the worst part? It crept up slowly, bit by bit, until I couldn't brush it aside anymore. At first, it was nothing major, just small things. Things that would have seemed normal if they didn't start stacking up. Amanda, she began acting different. I still remember the first time I noticed. She was glued to her phone. Now, we'd always been the kind of couple that shared everything. If one of us got a funny text, we'd laugh about it or show it to the other. But all of a sudden, that changed. She started getting secretive. I'd walk by, and she'd tilt her phone away from me, or lock it when I sat down next to her. And yeah, maybe that sounds paranoid, but when you've been with someone for years, you can tell when they start treating their phone like it holds the nation's top secrets. Then came the late nights. She worked in marketing, so late nights weren't unheard of, but they started happening more often. She'd come home smelling like perfume. Not the one she usually wore either. Her hair was done, makeup perfect, like she was going somewhere other than work. I tried to talk to her, ask how her day went, but she was always too tired to talk. She'd flash this empty smile and head straight to bed, leaving me alone in the living room with this growing knot in my gut. I'll never forget the night I finally lost it. She walked in way past midnight, and there I was sitting in the dark like some kind of cliché. "Where the hell have you been?" I asked, trying to keep it together. She barely glanced at me, rolling her eyes like I was being ridiculous. "I told you, I had a late meeting," she said, kicking off her shoes and heading for the bathroom. But this time, I wasn't letting it go. A late meeting that ends at midnight? Come on, Amanda. What's really going on? She didn't even turn around. "Work is stressful right now. You know how it is. Can we not do this tonight?" That was her favorite excuse. Work is stressful. And sure, maybe I was overthinking everything. But there was something about the way she said it, the way she wouldn't look me in the eye. It just didn't sit right. And then there was Ethan. Ethan had been my best friend for years. We'd been through it all together, but out of nowhere, he started pulling away. No more weekend fishing trips, no more after-work beers. He always had some excuse. Busy with work, family commitments, whatever. But the worst part? Even when we did hang out, he was off. Jittery, like he was waiting for something to explode. It wasn't just me who noticed either. Our other friends started to pick up on it, making little comments about how Ethan seemed distant. I remember one night after a few beers, one of the guys leaned in and said, "What's up with Ethan lately? He's been acting weird as hell." I laughed it off, shrugging. Yeah, probably just work stuff. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling. Was something going on with him? Was he hiding something from me? For a while, I tried to convince myself I was just being paranoid, reading too much into things. But over time, the signs were impossible to ignore. Amanda changed her phone password. And yeah, I get it, couples don't need to share every little thing, but she'd never done that before. We used to trust each other completely. Now it felt like I was living with a stranger. I tried talking to her. God knows I tried. I sat her down one night after dinner and said, "Look, I know work's been tough, but you've been distant lately. I just want to know if everything's all right." She didn't even hesitate. "I'm fine. It's just stress. You don't need to worry." But I wasn't fine. I felt like I was drowning, an outsider in my own marriage. Every time I tried to dig a little deeper, she'd give me the same tired lines. "It's just work. I'm tired. You're overthinking it." It wasn't just what she said. It was how she said it. Her voice had this coldness to it, like she was reading off a script. And yeah, I started checking her phone. I'm not proud of it, but what else was I supposed to do? I needed to know if I was losing my mind or if something was actually happening. But the thing is, no matter how many times I checked, I never found anything. No shady texts, no suspicious pictures. Just the same dull work emails and pointless group chats. Still, the more I searched, the more I convinced myself I was missing something. Then one night, after she came home from yet another one of those late meetings, I snapped. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I looked her straight in the eye and asked, "Are you cheating on me?" She froze, just for a split second, but it was enough for me to catch. Then she turned, gave me this irritated look, and said, "Seriously? After everything we've been through, you're accusing me of that?" Her words stung, but the way she said them, it was too polished, too perfect, like she'd been rehearsing it. I wanted to believe her. God knows I did. I wanted so badly to convince myself that I was wrong. But deep down, I knew the truth. She was lying. And Ethan? Yeah, he was lying too. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing my best friend. But instead of blowing up, instead of confronting them both right then and there, I did what anyone desperate for answers would do. I kept quiet. I watched. I waited. I started putting together the pieces, all while pretending I didn't know a thing. Every time Amanda went out, every time Ethan came up with another excuse, I logged it away, slowly building a wall between us. Because when the truth finally came out, I wanted to be ready. As much as I didn't want to believe it, I was clinging to this fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong. But when the signs keep hitting you in the face, there's only so much you can ignore. The breaking point came during a family dinner. Amanda had always been huge on family, her parents, my parents, everyone. We'd had this dinner planned for weeks, just a simple Sunday get-together. But that afternoon, she suddenly had a work emergency. And not just any emergency. One so urgent that she had to cancel the whole evening. No real explanation, just a vague something came up at work. That was the final straw. I couldn't take it anymore. I called Ethan, hoping we could at least hang out, blow off some steam over a few beers, but he didn't pick up. Not once. I left messages, texts, even checked his social media. Dead silence. At that moment, I knew. Something was definitely up. The next morning, I made the call. I can still feel how my hands shook when I dialed the number for the private investigator. It was like stepping over a line, one I knew I couldn't come back from. But at that point, I needed answers. I couldn't live in this fog of doubt any longer. The investigator's name was Greg. Seemed like your regular, no-nonsense kind of guy. Nothing flashy, just what I needed. We met at some hole-in-the-wall coffee shop across town, where no one would recognize me. I laid everything out for him. My suspicions, Amanda's weird behavior, the constant excuses. Greg just listened, taking notes like he'd heard it all 1,000 times before. I remember asking him, "How long does this usually take?" The investigation, Greg didn't even look up from his notes, just kept scribbling. "Depends. Some cases take a few days, some a couple of weeks. But trust me, if there's something going on, we'll find it." That if was the thread I clung to. I kept telling myself, maybe it was all in my head. Maybe Amanda really was just stressed. Maybe Ethan really was swamped with work. But deep down, I knew better. It didn't take long. 3 days later, Greg called. His voice was calm, steady, like he'd given bad news so many times. It didn't even faze him anymore. "I think you're going to want to see this," he said. We met again, same place. Greg slid a manila envelope across the table, and I just stared at it for a while. My stomach was in knots. I wasn't ready to open it, but I knew I had no choice. Inside were photos. Clear, undeniable pictures of Amanda and Ethan, together. And not just together, but together. Holding hands at a restaurant, walking into a hotel. Her laughing, leaning into him the way she used to with me. I felt sick, physically sick. But it didn't stop there. Greg had gone all out. There were text messages between them, screenshots of their conversations, even a video clip from a hotel security camera. There they were, arm in arm, disappearing behind a door. I couldn't breathe. I didn't want to believe it, even with all the evidence right in front of me. But there it was, staring me in the face. Amanda, the woman I had built my entire life around, and Ethan, the guy I'd trusted more than anyone, had both stabbed me in the back in the worst way possible. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at the pile of evidence. Greg didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just gave me space, letting me process it all. Finally, after what felt like forever, I managed to ask, "How long?" He just shrugged. "Best guess? A few months, maybe even longer." Months? They had been sneaking around behind my back for months. I wanted to break something, to scream, to get in my car, find them, and confront them right then and there. But I didn't. Instead, I thanked Greg, shoved the envelope into my bag, and walked out of that coffee shop like I was in a daze. On the drive home, the anger started to boil over. It wasn't just Amanda, though what she did cut deep, but Ethan, my best friend, my brother, the guy I trusted more than anyone else. And he did this to me? Stabbed me in the back, and thought I'd never find out? No way. He wasn't going to get away with it. Neither of them was. That's when the plan began to take shape. I wasn't going to go in guns blazing, all emotional and reckless. No, I was going to be smart about it. I was going to hit them where it hurt them most. For Amanda, it was our marriage. For Ethan, his precious career. Ethan worked at a big-name company where image was everything. He was always going on about how spotless his career was, how he was in line for a promotion, how he was the golden boy. That was my target, his career. I was going to tear it down piece by piece. The first step was getting more dirt. Sure, Greg had already given me enough, but I needed more. Something undeniable. Something that left no room for them to weasel out of it. I had Greg follow them for another week, collecting more evidence. It wasn't difficult. Amanda and Ethan were careless, acting like they'd never get caught. More dinners, more hotels, even a weekend trip. They didn't bother hiding it. Once I had everything, I began laying the groundwork. Ethan's company had a strict code of conduct, especially when it came to affairs that could tarnish their precious reputation. I knew if I played it right, I could destroy his entire career with a few well-timed pieces of evidence. I drafted an anonymous email to his HR department, attaching the most incriminating evidence. Photos of Ethan and Amanda together, texts, screenshots, and a note about how Ethan's affair was a potential threat to the company's image. I made sure to mention that he was up for a promotion, just to drive the knife in a little deeper. But I didn't hit send right away. No, I waited. I wanted to watch them sweat a bit longer. Every time Amanda came home late, every time she bailed on our plans, I smiled to myself. She had no clue what was coming. And Ethan? Well, he hadn't bothered to call me in weeks. I figured he was too busy screwing my wife to check in on his best friend. After what felt like an eternity, I finally sent the email, and I didn't feel a shred of guilt. They deserved every bit of what was coming their way. It didn't take long for things to start falling apart. Revenge isn't something you rush. If you want to do it right, you have to be patient. Cold, calculating patience. I wasn't going to let my emotions take over. Not after everything those two had done to me. No, I had to make sure it was perfect. It had to hit them where it hurt most. After sending the email to Ethan's HR, I didn't just sit back and relax. I kept gathering more dirt, making sure my case was airtight. Greg kept tailing them, and each new piece of evidence felt like another nail in their coffin. I knew their every move, every time they met up. It was almost laughable how careless they were, like they thought no one would ever figure it out. The more I watched, the more reckless they got. Ethan wasn't just sneaking Amanda into hotels anymore. They were going out in public, acting like some happy couple. I tracked their movements, learned their patterns. I knew when they met for lunch, where they went for drinks after work, even when they took their so-called business trip together. But the real jackpot? Social media. They thought they were being slick, posting vague pictures of sunsets, fancy dinners, and hotel rooms. But to anyone paying attention, it was obvious. Ethan would post a photo from a work event with a glass of wine, and an hour later, Amanda would post the same damn thing from the same place. They might as well have been waving in neon signs saying, "We're screwing." I saved everything. Screenshots, timestamps, comments. It was all part of the plan. Ethan's carefully curated image of being the perfect family man was about to come crashing down, and I was going to be the one swinging the wrecking ball. You see, Ethan wasn't just some guy in the office. He had big ambitions. He was always talking about his upcoming promotion, how everyone at work admired him. He'd built this image of himself as the perfect husband, a devoted father, the guy who always put family first. And it worked, at least for a while. He was well-liked, respected. But no one knew the real Ethan. No one but me. And that's where I planned to strike. Right at the heart of his career, the thing he held dearest. I was going to tear it apart, piece by piece. But before I dropped that bomb at his job, I needed to prime the rest of our circle. You can't just dump a truth like that all at once. It had to seep out slowly, like poison. I started small, just planting seeds of doubt with our mutual friends. Nothing obvious, just little comments here and there. Hey, have you noticed Ethan's been acting a bit off lately? Or, Amanda's been working late a lot lately, haven't seen her much. Nothing concrete, just enough to get the wheels turning in their heads. It didn't take long for the gossip to start. People love thinking they're in on a secret, and once those suspicions were out there, they did the rest of the work for me. The whispers found their way back to me soon enough, and I played my part perfectly, the concerned husband, trying to hold it all together. Yeah, it's been tough, I'd say, lowering my voice like I was sharing something private. Amanda's been distant lately, but we're working on it. It was all part of the setup. I wasn't just aiming to ruin Ethan's professional life. I wanted to break apart his relationships too. Friends, colleagues, even his own family. I wanted to isolate him from everyone who mattered to him. Ethan had always been the guy who had it all together, the one everyone admired. By the time I was finished, no one would trust him anymore. While the rumors were simmering, I kept an eye on Ethan's work situation. HR had received my anonymous email, but they hadn't acted on it yet. I knew it would take time for them to investigate, but that was fine. I wasn't in a rush. I wanted them to find the cracks for themselves. Meanwhile, I kept collecting more dirt just in case. One of the most satisfying moments was talking to Ethan's wife. She had no idea what her perfect husband was up to. I didn't say much, just asked how things were with Ethan and how their kids were doing. She gushed about him like he was a saint, saying how lucky she was to have him. It was hard not to laugh in her face. Keeping a straight face took every ounce of self-control I had. Every now and then, I'd feel a flicker of guilt. After all, Ethan's wife adored him, and their kids, they had no part in this. But then I'd think of the photos, the texts, the betrayal. The guilt disappeared real quick after that. As the weeks went on, the tension grew. Ethan and Amanda carried on like they didn't have a care in the world, completely unaware of the walls closing in. People began to notice the strain between me and Ethan. Mutual friends would ask why we weren't hanging out anymore. What had changed? I'd shrug it off with a vague, people change, I guess, but I could see the curiosity burning in their eyes. They were hungry for the full story, and soon enough, they'd get it. Finally, after all the planning, it was time for the real takedown. See, revenge isn't just about striking back. It's about timing. You need to hit when it'll cause the most damage, when the impact will reverberate through every part of their lives. That's what I had in mind when I planned the event. Amanda and Ethan wouldn't just feel my wrath in private. They were going to be exposed in front of everyone they cared about. It took weeks to pull together. I rented this fancy venue, one of those upscale places people use for corporate parties or big celebrations. It needed to look official, like a grand, innocent event. I sent out the invitations, making sure all the right people were on the list. Our mutual friends, colleagues, and a few of Ethan's higher-ups from work. If I was going to ruin him, it had to be in front of the people whose opinions he valued the most. I didn't hold back with Amanda's family either. Her parents had always been supportive of us, and I knew this would hit them hard. But they deserved to know what their precious daughter had been up to. Everyone connected to our lives was invited. No one would escape witnessing what was about to go down. In the days leading up to the event, I rehearsed my speech over and over again. It had to be perfect. This wasn't going to be some emotional outburst. I needed to stay calm, composed, like I was just stating the facts. Facts that no one could argue with. I had everything ready. The photos, the videos, the texts, organized, printed, and set to display on the big screen. I even hired a tech guy to make sure the presentation would go off without a hitch. This wasn't just revenge. This was going to be a public execution, and I was going to make damn sure it was flawless. The night of the event, the atmosphere was thick with excitement. People were laughing, drinking, chatting about their families and jobs, treating it like just another casual get-together. Amanda was there too, playing the part of the perfect wife, all smiles and charm, mingling with everyone as if everything in our lives was just fine. And Ethan? He was working the room like he owned it, shaking hands, laughing, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. I stood on the other side of the room, keeping my distance, watching them enjoy what would be their last moments of ignorant bliss. It was almost entertaining, in a twisted way, to see how confident they both were, how certain they were that they'd gotten away with everything. They had no idea what was coming for them. When the moment felt right, I stepped up to the front of the room. The lights dimmed, and the chatter died down as all eyes turned toward me. I tapped the microphone, clearing my throat, and began. "I just want to thank you all for being here tonight," I said, my voice steady and controlled. "It means a lot to have friends, family, and colleagues gathered together like this. Lately, I've been reflecting on what friendship means, what trust means, about how important it is to know the people you care about are there for you, no matter what." I could see Amanda glancing at me, confusion flickering across her face. Ethan, standing toward the back, suddenly looked nervous. "Good. And tonight," I continued, "I want to share something with you all, something personal, something that's been weighing on me for a while now." I nodded to the tech guy at the back of the room, and the screen behind me lit up. The first image appeared, Amanda and Ethan, hand in hand, outside a restaurant. There was an audible gasp from the crowd. Amanda's face went pale, and Ethan's smile vanished in an instant. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "is my wife and my best friend, caught in the act sneaking around behind my back." I didn't stop there. The photos kept coming, more shots of them together, laughing, kissing, disappearing into hotels. Then came the texts, screenshots of their conversations, filled with flirty banter, plans to meet up, and even mocking jokes about how clueless I was. The room was completely silent except for the murmurs of disbelief rippling through the crowd. Amanda tried to speak, stumbling over her words. It's not what it looks like," she stammered, her voice trembling, but no one was buying it. Her weak excuses couldn't hide the truth anymore. Ethan didn't even try to defend himself. He just stood there, frozen, the reality of the situation hitting him like a freight train. I could see it in his eyes. He was already panicking, realizing there was no way he could explain this away to his boss, his colleagues, or his family. The crowd didn't stay silent for long. The shock turned to anger. Friends who had known us for years started shouting, asking how Amanda and Ethan could do something like this. Some turned to me, offering their support, but I wasn't looking for sympathy. This wasn't about pity. This was about justice. Amanda's parents, sitting in the front row, looked like they'd been blindsided. Her mother's eyes were filled with tears, and her father just sat there, shaking his head in disbelief. A part of me almost felt bad for them, almost. The room broke into factions. Some gathered around me, offering their condolences, saying things like, "I can't believe they did this to you." Others turned on Amanda and Ethan, demanding answers, questioning how they could betray everyone like this. The scene was chaos. Amanda, desperate, tried to come up to me, her face twisted in panic. "Please, let's talk about this." "It's not what you think," she pleaded, her voice cracking. I stepped back, shaking my head. "There's nothing to talk about, Amanda. You made your decision," I said coldly. "Now you have to live with it." Ethan, meanwhile, stood there, speechless. He knew it was over. His career, his friendships, his golden boy reputation, all of it was crumbling in front of him. The higher-ups from his company were already whispering among themselves, distancing themselves from him. His spotless image was shattered beyond repair. I let them stew in their shame for a while, watching as the weight of their actions fully hit them. By the end of the night, Amanda was a wreck, trying to explain herself to anyone who would listen, but no one cared. Ethan had slunk off to a corner, probably trying to figure out how he was going to salvage whatever scraps of his life were left. As the event wound down, people began to leave, shaking their heads in disbelief. A few told me I'd done the right thing, that they were proud of me for standing up for myself. But I didn't feel proud, just empty. At least it was over. The fallout from the scandal spread like wildfire. Within days, everyone knew what had happened. Amanda and Ethan's names were being whispered everywhere. At work, Ethan's bosses found out about the affair, thanks to my timely email, and his promotion was swiftly taken off the table. I even heard rumors that they were considering firing him altogether, not wanting the bad press associated with his name. As for Amanda, she lost more than just her reputation. The fallout was only just beginning for her. Life after the scandal? It was like watching a wildfire tear through everything, leaving nothing but ashes behind. Amanda and Ethan, they lost it all. And you know what? I can't say they didn't deserve every bit of it. Let's talk about Ethan. He always carried himself with such confidence, as if his career was untouchable. He'd brag endlessly about how far he'd come, how secure his future was. But after that night, all of that unraveled faster than he could have imagined. Word got out, and his bosses couldn't afford to be associated with a scandal like his. The promotion he had been flaunting for months? Gone in an instant. His job? Also gone. They let him go quietly, trying to avoid public embarrassment, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. His carefully crafted image of being the perfect family man and top employee, completely obliterated. No one at work could trust him anymore, and everyone distanced themselves from the guy who had betrayed his best friend and cheated on his wife. And his family? That picture-perfect family he loved to parade around? It disintegrated too. His wife didn't just find out about the affair with Amanda. She discovered years of lies he'd been feeding her. She took the kids, packed her things, and walked out of his life. Word is she's already filed for divorce. Ethan's life went up in flames, all because he couldn't resist sleeping with my wife. Now Amanda, she didn't escape unscathed either. Her family, the ones who always treated her like some untouchable saint, completely turned their backs on her. Her parents were humiliated, ashamed of what she had done. Our friends, people we had known for years, wanted nothing to do with her anymore. Overnight, she became a pariah, the woman who betrayed her husband with his closest friend. And me? I cut her off completely. She tried to reach out, called, texted, even showed up at my door once, crying and begging for forgiveness. But I didn't bother responding. She made her choice, and now she had to live with the consequences. I'll admit, there was a certain satisfaction in watching their lives fall apart. It felt like justice for what they did. But, in the end, that satisfaction didn't last. Because when it was all over, I was still left standing in the wreckage of my own life. Starting over was no walk in the park. The betrayal hit hard, and for a long time, trusting anyone felt impossible. I pulled away from people, isolated myself. I couldn't bear being around anyone who reminded me of what happened. But eventually, I realized that hiding away wasn't going to help. I had to rebuild. So, I took baby steps. Slowly, I let new people into my life. People who didn't know the full story, who didn't see me as the guy whose wife cheated on him. It took time, but eventually, I learned to trust again, even if cautiously. And, as much as I didn't want to admit it, the pain started to dull. It never fully disappeared, but I found ways to live with it. I put my focus back on myself for the first time in a long while. I picked up hobbies I dropped, started traveling, and met new people. Sure, there were still moments when it stung, moments when I thought about the life I thought I had, the trust one believed was there. But every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of how far I'd come. I wasn't the broken man they left behind. I was someone who had fought through the storm and come out the other side. If this whole experience taught me anything, it's how fragile trust really is. The people you think you know, the ones you think would never hurt you, they can destroy you in an instant without a second thought. But it also taught me something even more important. You can't control what other people do. You can't make them love you or stay loyal, no matter how much you give. The only thing you can control is how you respond when everything falls apart. For the longest time, I blamed myself. I thought I wasn't enough, that I should have seen it coming or done something differently. But that's complete nonsense. Their betrayal had nothing to do with me. It was about their choices, their selfishness, and their inability to be honest. Once I realized that, I was able to let go of the guilt, the anger, and the pain. The biggest lesson I learned? You have to know your worth. You can't let anyone make you feel like you're less than you are. At the end of the day, the only person who will always have your back is you. And that's enough. So, here I am living life on my own terms. I'm not out there searching for a new relationship, and honestly, I might not ever look for one again. But I'm okay with that. I've learned to be content with myself, without needing someone else to make me feel whole. And honestly, that's the best revenge I could have ever asked for.